the first episode of Huddling with our guest, Rohas Nagpal. I think some of y'all might have seen him in multiple other episodes. I think he's the voice of cryptography and blockchain. But to simply give an introduction, he's been working with multiple governments around the world. He is a founder of an Asian School of Cyber Laws. But what's more interesting, and something that I followed him, was from his playbook that he's written on future of money, and where he's working on the future money wallet as well. So let's welcome Rohas. Hi, Rohas. Welcome to this.
Hi, Gaurang. How are you doing?
Very well. So, one of the things that I thought was that somebody who comes from a traditional finance world where, because I only believe in one version of saving, which is the markets and this thing. And it would be very interesting to say that, at least you come from an alternate viewpoint around the same. But before we get into this, would love to understand a little bit of background. How did you get into blockchain, cryptography, and just to get to know who you are and why you do this so passionately?
Sure. So I actually come from the cybersecurity, cyber investigation background. And then I've worked in that field for more than 20 years. So one of the main things that I used to do was assisting law enforcement agencies in various investigations. And I've done this for about 18 different countries. And I remember in about 2011, where I was investigating a case of the drug mafia using Bitcoin for drug payments. And that was the first time in my life I actually heard the word Bitcoin. So what was actually happening in that case was that, there were these few college students, and one of them was going off to the US for his higher education. So he decided to give a party to a few friends.
Okay.
And they went online and somewhere and they bought drugs. Now, after consuming those drugs, these guys started hallucinating and started seeing zombies everywhere. Now, one of the guys got so freaked out that he started banging his head against a wall and he died. And that's what freaked the police out, that what is this new kind of drug that has entered our country? Okay. Now, when we started to investigate, I realized that how you buy it is you go to this coffee shop and there's a youngster sitting there and you give him cash. He would then convert the cash into something called Bitcoin, which we had never heard. And then he would give you a number, say 84. A few days later, a book lands up at your house through a courier company. And it could be a Harry Potter, for example. You open up page 84 and tear it out. Cut it into small pieces, put a piece on your tongue, and the drug takes effect. So this is, that
page 84 was where the drug.
Yeah. When he told you 84 means page 84 you have to tear out. And then you cut that into pieces, put it on your tongue, and the drug takes effect. Of course, if you don't know the page, you're probably going to have to eat the entire book. So these are, these synthetic chemical drugs which are fairly new at that time. And they look like a glass of water. You can dip a brush in it, put it on a piece of paper. As soon as the paper dries, even a police dog cannot sniff it. It's colorless, tasteless, odorless.
Wow. Okay.
That was the first time I heard of Bitcoin. Then when I actually started to read the white paper, I was completely blown. So all my life I've been working in crypto, cryptography. And this was the first time I actually saw cryptography being used for a real life electronic peer-to-peer cash. And that was always considered to be the dream or the holy grail in crypto.
To basically send money through code around the same.
Well, the important thing is you do not need a central entity issuing money. In fact, I'll tell you what I mean. Now, let me ask a small question.
Yes.
Is this 200 rupees?
Yeah.
Actually, it's not. Because if it was 200 rupees, why would it have a promise written here which says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of 200 rupees and signed by a gentleman who's the big boss of the Reserve Bank of India.
Yeah.
So again, my question to you is, if this is 200, why does it have a promise that he will pay us 200?
Because there is a central authority that defines it, right? This goes back to the kings at one point that used to say that the value of a particular metal is been assigned by me, and I am the trustee I am the trust bearer of this thing, that if you come to me, at least I will give you 200 rupees worth of value.
Now, if we go to the Reserve Bank and give this, what do you think he's going to give us?
Basically, another rupee of 200 rupees, right? That's about it.
He's probably going to give us coins like this.
Yeah.
Or very few people have seen a 1 rupee note, which I seem to have misplaced. I brought it out to show it to you guys. So anyway, if you've seen a 1 rupee note, it doesn't have a promise written on it.
Okay.
Because it is not issued by the Reserve Bank of India. It is issued by the Secretary Ministry of Finance, and it does not have a promise on it. So when we look at this, let's not even call it money. Let's just call it currency. So this is a promissory note payable to the bearer on demand. And this is a very specific definition. So if Can I issue something like this by putting my photograph and my signature? Can I issue it? I'm not putting Gandhiji, I'm putting myself and I'm signing it. Can I still issue this?
Till the time there is faith in you, right? So
No,
people around you.
I can't. Because the Reserve Bank of India says, the Reserve Bank of India Act says, nobody in India other than the Reserve Bank can issue a promissory note payable to the bearer on demand. And because of that section, I can't issue this. So
Okay.
as an ordinary person, I can issue a promissory note provided I've either mentioned the name of the person I will repay or a date or both. Only the Reserve Bank has a right to issue a promissory note without the name of the person, without a date. And that is what forms the basis of the Indian currency.
Or all currencies around the world.
Well, Indian currency primarily, because then if we move our attention to the US dollar, it doesn't use a promise.
Okay.
And it straight away talks about, so if you look at a $100 bill, it will no longer, nowhere will it have a promise. And it says this is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And then if we try to look at the euro, it will have probably nothing like that written. So different countries have created this on different logic. So the US dollar is actually a very interesting concept. So there was a time when all the world's currencies were backed by either silver or gold. And it was very easy because silver and gold intrinsically have value. Of course, there must have been a time in the evolution of humans where we didn't value these shiny metals either.
True.
But over time, we came to give them value. So there was a time silver was accepted, then the world moved on to gold. And what the US did was, it was a currency that continued to back itself with gold, which means the US was always ready to reimburse you. And if you gave them back dollars, they would give you actual gold.
Gold, yes.
Now, because they were doing this, and after World War I, World War II, most of the world's economies were hit very badly. They didn't have enough gold to do this anymore. So people started pegging to the dollar.
True.
And then one fine day, I think it was 15th August 1971, when the US President Nixon said, out of the blue, he one day announced that the US dollar is now no longer pegged to gold. And that
He
was
didn't
the
want to
day.
pay back because was it that the Americans owed enough money by that time and they didn't want to have a situation where they had to give a lot of gold back if the demand arises?
You're quite right. They'd issued a lot of currency, and well, one fine day they said, now we will no longer pay back gold. But because they were the most powerful currency at that time, the rest of the world continued to peg to the dollar, even though the dollar is pegged to nothing today.
Interesting. And
So this today is an example of a piece of paper which only has value because people give it that value. Intrinsically, it has no value. You cannot convert it to anything else, as in gold, silver, nothing. As long as people are ready to accept it. Now, let's take an example of this. So, this is the currency of Zimbabwe.
yes.
And a few years ago, it went into a complete fall. And this is a note of $10 billion. And I can buy virtually nothing, right?
Yeah, so you're owner of a $10 billion note now.
Yeah, but which is worthless.
Yeah.
I can't even buy a loaf of bread with this.
Totally.
This could reach the same thing. So, people who say that Bitcoin is backed by nothing and it is useless. Well, I'm not a maximalist who's going to try to tell you that even the dollar is not backed by anything and could become worthless. But guess what? It can. We've seen the biggest of companies in the world also collapse. Wherein a world was ruled by Nokia and BlackBerry, and today they're virtually worthless. We've seen some of the top companies go bust, and currencies also go bust. In fact, there's a cycle. We've seen in the past, the Portuguese currency at one time was the global reserve. We've seen the British currency being the reserve. Now we've seen the US currency. And usually the average is about 94 years for a currency to remain a global reserve. The US has already crossed a century. So maybe it could be wiped out. Maybe it could be replaced by the Chinese currency. Nobody really knows. But we have to keep our mind open. And we have to realize that when we look at this, it is not money. It is purely a medium of exchange. And I'll give you one example to prove it. When I was in college, with 100 rupees, I could get a tank full of petrol on my motorbike. 10 rupees was the cost of petrol. And with a 100 rupee note, 10 liters of petrol, my tank's full. Suppose I had kept that 100 rupee note in a drawer and I opened the drawer today, I would buy 1 liter only. So what's happened to that 100 rupee note's value? From 10 liters, today it buys 1 liter. So what we must remember that this is a depreciating item. And inflation is a measure of how its value falls. And the rate of inflation for everybody is different. So if in your monthly budget you spend more on alcohol, cigarettes, and packaged goods, your inflation rate is probably going to be 20% a year. In my budget, if I spend more on atta dal chawal, my inflation will actually be much lower. And once I calculate my inflation, now I know what is the minimum return I need to keep this at value. Because if my money is losing 20% a year and my investments are getting me 10% a year, what am I actually doing? Losing 10% a year.
Absolutely.
So I know it's a very basic concept, but I think everyone needs to realize what inflation actually means, and it's different for everyone. Of course,
No, totally.
you're a financial whiz. I'm not trying to teach this to you,
No,
but
no, no.
most
But
people don't understand this.
the funny part is most people in finance also end up forgetting the context of inflation. And you're absolutely right. It's very personal because eventually your basket, and the reason we take a national average is also because typically users are similar, right? Not everyone can be on the extreme alcoholic side, or this thing we end up consuming X amount of staples to X amount. But just taking a side corollary, right? What would what are the scenarios that would make a currency less valuable than compared to the rest of them, right? So coming to the US, I just want to throw out as a conversation thing, what results in, so is it excessive debt? Is it price mismatch management? Or is it the fact that you're not able to create returns or revenue to pay off your past debts, right? Because those are the three scenarios that are playing around in the world today.
Actually, that's a very interesting question. Every time the government of the US issues this, which by the way, surprisingly, the government doesn't, the Federal Reserve does. And most people don't know that's a private party. It's not actually a government like Reserve Bank of India. So anyway, that's another crazy rabbit hole. We won't go through that right now. But why did this first get value? It was because of the world wars. Because at that time, the US, which is very lucky in terms of its geography, it's surrounded by the ocean on two sides, Canada on one side, and a very small border with Mexico. So they're in a very secure physical location and they were insulated from the war. And Europe started to outsource a lot of stuff to the US. So England went to them saying, take our gold, take our patents, and please make machines and send it back to us.
Yeah.
So the whole world started using the US as the world's factory. And that, along with their military power, which they demonstrated with the first nuclear bomb, that showed the world that, okay, the US is the big boss, so we might as well start using their currency for global transactions. Because try to think about it, after World War II, what else could you have used? I mean, India was really tiny, Japan was completely demolished by the nuclear weapon, China was still struggling, UK was completely devastated, Euro didn't exist. What else did we have? So the US dollar became the global way in which you would peg all exports and imports. Because internationally, you have to have one currency, otherwise, it's very difficult to do trade. And that's what got the US dollar in. And unless suddenly now other countries give an alternative, this will not change. And I see personally the Chinese currency giving the biggest alternative.
No, because as you're saying, right, they are the largest manufacturer, they are the largest exporter. They're also, in a sense, we're trading directly now with China, and China is now taking the direct pegging, right? So, for example, the recent trade between China and Iran on oil, they're basically bypassing the dollar, right? And they're saying, we're going to exchange between our currencies.
Absolutely.
Now, so that's perhaps the new world, and we're dependent on that. But can you?
So, for example, China goes to Sri Lanka and says, I will build a port and dams and bridges and roads for you. In return, give me X years of complete mineral rights. Now, that kind of stuff they're doing in Africa, they're doing in so many other countries. So, suddenly we are beginning to see that so many countries are actually already using the Chinese currency. We just don't realize it. And China has also taken the lead in their first central bank digital currency, which they've already rolled out and done billions of transactions with. So they're like really far ahead when it comes to currency today, and most people are not even seeing what's happening.
So on a side note, and I was thinking about this central currency, right? And let's take a side track and then we come back to the basics, right? So the fact that I was just thinking, right? Let's assume India from tomorrow morning, we anyway do digital transaction between you and me. Instead of using GPay, I'm using the Indian rupee. Now we start doing the digital rupee, right? Right. Let's call it INR as the digital version of sending it. It just opens such very interesting use case, right? This whole concept of digital currency versus physical currency, right? Would you like to just throw a light on, because one of the things I was thinking of is that one of the biggest challenges government and an economy has is to feed the poor, right? Social security and social causes, right? So for education, health, infra, and it leads to such an interesting food stamp analogy, right? Now I can't give you cash and you can't burn it on alcohol or other things, right? When I create a digital currency of giving you a 5,000 rupee food stamp or a 1,000 rupee LPG subsidy, you can only use it for buying that LPG, right? That just unlocks such an interesting context. Why don't we just let's speak about that and then let's bring it back to crypto.
Sure. One thing I wanted to clarify that when we talk about a CBDC or a central bank digital currency, we're not talking about e-money. So today, when you have your apps, your banking app, it has money in electronic form. That's called e-money. It is simply a digital representation of physical money, but that is in private databases. So every bank would have your balance in its private database. That is why when you try to move that money to another bank, there is a friction. Now of course we have UPI, so things happen fast. But otherwise, even when we were in the world of checks, it would take a few days, especially if there's a Saturday, Sunday in the middle. But even today, when you move money from one country to another, it takes several days and a lot of money in commissions because it is moving through multiple private databases. The moment you put your money on a blockchain and call it a central bank digital currency, it is now on a ledger that multiple people can see. And that's why it can be moved in seconds globally. That's the fundamental difference.
So let's break it down. Okay. So I just want to ask you, so what does when you describe blockchain, right, or a ledger, why don't you describe it in the context of tomorrow's digital currency of India that's coming up?
I'll do that. So today when you look at, say, you get your bank statement in an electronic form or physical form. So it has all the transactions and your balances showing in that. So now that transactions, those have happened in privately in a bank. So another bank doesn't know it. So ICICI Bank cannot give me the bank statement of somebody from Axis Bank.
True.
But when we take this onto a distributed ledger, consider it like that bank statement, but now everybody can see the same statement. So when you go to the Bitcoin ledger, there's something called a blockchain explorer. So if you go there and you will be able to see every Bitcoin transaction that has ever happened in the world, starting from the first one in 2010 till today. Every transaction from which address, how much went to what address, what was the amount and what was the date, forever and ever is in that ledger which can never be tampered. That is a blockchain. A ledger that everybody can see. That doesn't mean they can move my money. So if I want to move my money from, for example, Axis Bank app, I need to log into the app and send the money out.
True.
But when I want to move my money from my Bitcoin wallet to somebody else's, let's say to yours, I would still use something that looks similar to an app. But there's a very important difference. My private keys are in that, and I need that to move the money. So if I was to accidentally delete my Axis Bank app, is my money lost? No. Axis Bank will say reinstall the app, we'll authenticate you, your money is still there. But if I lose my private key or I delete my Bitcoin app, my Bitcoins are gone. And I have done this with myself. So when I first came across Bitcoin, it was virtually worthless. I mined a few Bitcoins, found it very interesting, and then I was shifting my laptop, so I deleted those. So what did I effectively do? I deleted my private keys, which means even today I can go to the blockchain and see those Bitcoins stuck in that address. I know it's my address, but I don't have the private key, so I can't move it anymore.